Thank you very much. This is a very interesting hearing, very helpful. I want to start off on where Mr. Lucas and Mr. Hinojosa left, because I think that is the problem. And you can't really solve a problem until you define it. I mean, we got community banks, we got regional banks, then we got too big to fail banks. In other words, we have these titles, but we don't have the definition. You don't define, if you can't get your hands around the problem if you don't adequately define it. And do you define it by size or complexity? Now, I think that was a part of the root of the problem that we had in Georgia. Now, as many of you know, Georgia led the nation in bank closures. And my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Len Westmoreland, and I pulled together a big event down in Georgia where we brought the Federal Reserve, and I think some of y'all know about that. We brought the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller General, all the bank examiners, to find out why in the world, what happened that my state of Georgia led the nation in bank closing for over 4 or 5 years during the mortgage breakdown. You all familiar with that? Are you all familiar with that? I want to know what happened there. Lynn and I consistently complained that we have not gotten reports on it. So I want to make sure that if you all can respond to that now, if you're familiar with it, perhaps, but your bank regulators were there. Now, part of the problem was indeed that our Georgia banks, as many banks did over-leverage in their portfolios in terms of real estate and mortgage, as did the whole country, did the whole industry. But something strange happened down there. And we discovered that when you all came down there, and we had the big hearing. Len and I together cover about 25 or 26 different counties. And in these areas, it's the community banks that are the lifeblood of those communities. So unless we define community banks, unless we can come up with those reasons, we really are not getting our hands around it. So I just want to say, do any of you have any comment? Are you familiar with that report? What happened? I'd like to know what the impact. Our banks were saying the bank examiners didn't give them time. They weren't aware. They were over-regulated. They didn't understand the complexity of the rules. So there was some blame put at the feet of the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller Currency, and the Federal Reserve as to what happened. You all familiar with that in Georgia?
Yes, I'll start. One of the problems with the financial institutions in Georgia is that as a group they were heavily concentrated in acquisition, development, and construction lending. When the real estate market took a turn and mortgages, property values dropped dramatically, projects that were midstream became difficult to finish because there was nobody to buy the finished product. The values had dropped. And that kind of concentration and saturation in a very tight market of that kind of product in that kind of market environment is largely what caused the problem.
All right. I'd just like to ask, I know we have a representative of the Federal Reserve here, and we have a representative of the FDIC, and we have a representative of the Office of Comptroller Currency. I'm sure both my colleague Len Westmoreland and I would love to get that report as to what is going on there. As I said before, the community banks are the lifeblood. They're sort of in the middle. So, Mr. Bland, I want to go back to you. How would you define right now, if somebody had to ask you right now, in 25 seconds I got left, what is a community bank? What would you say?
My first response would be, TIP tends to be locally owned and locally operated. But I'll go back to what I said before about where we stand in this industry today and looking forward with the innovation that's happening in there. And so a lot of it's the scale It's the type of products that they offer. But to your point about how we would approach it is, I think it's important to look at our supervisory process. At the OCC, we have a separate community bank program that I oversee. And so our primary focus for the people that report to me that I work with is on community banks. And so we look at those institutions separate and apart from the large banks, our approaches to our policies and our procedures. And for each institution, we take a customized view of what we need to do there. So we have a supervisory strategy that is focused on at each individual institution.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that it might be helpful for the full committee. This was a very good hearing down there. If we would ask the Office of Controller, the Federal Reserve, and FDIC, if they would get that report and their findings, conclusions, and recommendations of what they did in Georgia at our hearing, I would appreciate it.
I think that message hopefully has been delivered today, Mr. Scott.
All right, thank you.
Now turn to